Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So in this week's video, I'm going to be reviewing and reacting to an old recording of mine, a performance that I did while I was an undergraduate in college. I think I was a sophomore at the time. And yeah, I found this old video and I thought that would be interesting to just kind of watch and then talk about my experience and what I learned from it and how I think collaborative piano has changed the way I think about teaching and even performing. So without further ado, let's go ahead and check it out. Okay, so first of all, not as bad as I remember. You know how when you perform and you make a mistake and you kind of lose it for a whole measure and you feel like, oh my gosh, it's terrible, it just fell apart, or you kind of missed a note here or there. It just feels like the whole performance was terrible. But then when you watch it back later, if you recorded it, you go, that was actually pretty good. And that's kind of how I felt about that. I'd only done a chamber music recital like that twice before, and let me clarify, these were single pieces. Like I played a movement of that, and there was other students performing as well. And the first time I ever performed in a chamber music setting was I was performing my own piano trio. You can check that out. I'll put a card up above. And that was a lot easier because I composed the piece, and so I was really familiar with it, although it was still really difficult. Because I think one thing, as pianists and as teachers, we tend to focus on solo rep and developing technique. Those are the sort of the things we really focus on, which is obvious. Of course we do. But then, when you get older, you go to college, maybe you want to, get your feet wet as a pianist and make some money. And suddenly everyone wants you to do collaborative piano, which is a whole new thing. It's completely different. And I had a class for 2 years that it was basically all about trying to teach us piano performance majors to be good collaborative pianists. And they would do recitals, not every semester, I think just in the fall, so 2 different recitals. The first time I accompanied a vocal major. The second time was this one. What was really great about the experience is that the teachers kind of purposely, I feel like, maybe they don't entirely, but it's they try to make it as real world as possible. And what that means is, you get the music, 2 to 3 weeks before you're supposed to perform sometimes. And you have 2, maybe 3, if you're lucky, rehearsals oftentimes. And then it's just like, bam, go, do it. And that was a really difficult situation for me because, like I mentioned, I mostly do solo piano. That's pretty much my thing. And so that's not the case, right? You don't get a piece of music and you're like, oh, 2 weeks later I'm performing it. No, I want to sit with it for 6 months to a year before I really perform it because, it's just, the early stages after you learn a piece, it's hard to really have it, as perfect as you can get it. And so in that sense, the experience was really good. But let's actually talk about a few things in the video itself. So a couple things that I noticed, like I mentioned, it wasn't quite as bad as I remembered it being. One thing that I noticed is that there was that place early on, I think around a minute or so, where I totally lost it for like at least 1-2 measures, I think. But I got right back with it. And that was something that my teacher really just hammered with me, especially because I really struggled with that, is you always have to be thinking 1 beat ahead so you can always just keep going. And I was really, really happy, I remember, after the performance because I did keep it together, because there'd been plenty of times in the past, and I think we all can say this, where you lose it and it takes several measures to get back and you kind of almost stop sometimes. So I was really happy about that. One thing I noticed, I'm really trying to work hard at the voicing. I'm really almost like slapping my hand, using some kind of rotation and circular gesture. And sometimes, I think most of the time the voicing is pretty good, although sometimes the inner voice kind of come out a little bit too much. And then there's a section, I actually have the music right here. I think it's at 1 minute, 20 seconds. It's like measure 29 in the music. The cello comes in just playing duplets. And so I'm playing triplets, she's playing duplets, which is hard to get. Once we got it, it was easier, but then I start playing, right, that 2 against 3 rhythm myself, but the 2 is with her instead of usually in the piece, I was sort of playing triplets, more sort of keeping the beat with her, if that makes sense. I feel like that was an awkward way to say it. That was a really, really hard passage, and I actually held it together really well. One thing I remember that was really, really hard for me as well is, you have to sort of multitask when you're doing any kind of collaborative piano thing like that. So I remember, this one class, my teacher, she wasn't yelling at me or anything. She's really nice. She just gets intense, but she was almost just like, oh, so intense. And I was struggling because, you're trying to play and the piece doesn't sound super hard, but it's not easy. Let's just say that. And she's like, you always have to be listening to the cello. You always have to make sure you always hear the cello. And so you have to sort of like split your brain and be able to play and think about what you're doing, but then listen and make sure you can always hear them. Because you'll notice kind of where the cello's playing that duplet sort of arpeggiated line that comes down, and then the piano comes in and is playing down as she's playing back up. And then she gets to the top and she takes time and then goes back into it. Well, that's really hard to do. And I really struggled with that, and it actually came through really well again in the recording, which I was really happy about. I think the biggest thing that I sort of learned through the process is that I think it's really important as teachers and even as a pianist to really develop those collaborative skills as much as you can. So for instance, one thing that I started doing that I didn't used to do as much with my students, I would try to play duets with them, especially the younger kids, as much as possible, because it does sort of help create a sort of collaborative piano environment where they can learn to play with someone else, always be listening to someone else and leading or just following as well. And so that's something that I really like to do, and sight reading duets is a fantastic way to practice that, absolutely. But I kind of wanted to share it because, so often, especially here on YouTube, we see everyone wants to show things that are perfect. And so I think sometimes showing something that's not perfect and just kind of talking about it and saying, hey, this is an experience and that I learned from, and it wasn't perfect, and that's okay. We can talk about it and we can sort of see what we can learn from it. And I hope that you guys found it interesting, informative. If you have any questions or comments, requests for future videos, please don't forget to put those in the comments below. I always love hearing from you guys, and I always love getting new requests for videos. I try to make as many of them as I can, so don't forget to do that. Anyway, that's it for this one, and I'll see you guys next time.